The storm had left more than broken fences in Silver Creek. It left a mystery. In a small Colorado town, a wild black horse stood caged, eyes burning with fear no man could calm. Guns failed. Ropes failed. And then a poor boy no one noticed stepped through the dust with an apple in his hand and courage in his heart. What happened next would change them both forever. The storm came like a living thing, a roaring wall of wind and thunder rolling down the valley of Silver Creek, Colorado. Lightning flashed against the shoulders of the Rockies, splitting the night open. Roof shingles flew like cards, fences cracked, and rain hammered the dry earth until the whole world smelled of mud and fear. By morning, the town crawled out to count what the storm had spared. Near the old grazing fields, where the wooden fences had splintered and the air still hung heavy with moisture, someone shouted, "There's something stuck in the fence!" They gathered, men with ropes, women clutching shawls, children on tiptoe. And there it was, a wild black horse, its coat slick with rain, its flanks trembling. Its mane clung to its neck like dark seaweed, and its eyes, sharp, terrified, defiant, glimmered through the mist. The animal thrashed against the broken railings, muscles rippling under the wet hide. Each time someone took a step closer, it lunged, teeth bared, hooves pounding the mud. Sheriff Dalton lifted a hand. "Stay back. That one's got the devil in him." From the crowd, a small voice whispered, "He's just scared." No one noticed the boy at first. 12, maybe 13, thin as a reed, clothes 2 sizes too big. His name was Tommy Clark. He stood barefoot in the wet grass, eyes wide, watching the horse fight against the ropes. His mother, Martha, hurried over and grabbed his shoulder. "Tommy, don't. You'll get hurt." But Tommy didn't move. Something in the horse's struggle, the raw panic, the loneliness, felt too familiar. The men finally managed to pull the animal free and drag it toward a makeshift pen near the edge of town. It reared up, snorting, kicking, wild against the ropes. The sheriff cursed under his breath. "We'll keep it here till someone figures what to do." As the crowd dispersed, laughter and gossip rippled behind them. "Mean one, that beast. Should have just let the storm take it. No man can tame something like that." But Tommy stayed long after everyone had gone. The pen was quiet now, except for the sound of rain dripping through the roof slats. The horse stood inside, chest heaving, steam curling from its nostrils. In the half-light, its coat looked like polished coal. Tommy crouched near the fence. He could smell the damp hay, the raw scent of animal sweat. The horse turned its head slightly, and their eyes met through the wooden bars, black on brown, both full of something wordless. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the horse snorted sharply, as if to warn him away. Tommy stepped back, but not far. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe now." Martha called from the road, her voice thin against the wind. "Tommy, let's go home." He hesitated, glancing once more at the creature before turning away. The horse stamped its hooves, restless, shaking droplets of water from its mane. That night, long after the lights in Silver Creek had gone dark, Tommy couldn't sleep. The image of that black horse filled his mind, its wild eyes, the way it trembled as if the whole world had turned against it. He lay in bed listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in their wooden cabin. His mother snored softly in the next room. And somewhere beyond the fields, he thought he could still hear the faint sound of hooves. Steady, angry, alone. Tommy whispered into the dark. "You're not the devil. You're just lost." Outside, thunder rolled one last time, echoing through the mountains. The rain stopped. And in that fragile silence, a small idea began to grow inside the boy's heart. A dangerous, impossible thought that by morning would not let him rest. He didn't know it yet, but the storm had left more than broken fences behind. It had left him a purpose, one that would test every ounce of courage and kindness he had. And as dawn crept over the Rockies, painting the wet fields in pale gold, Tommy whispered again, this time like a promise. "I'll come back for you." The morning after the storm smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Silver Creek came alive again. Wagons creaked, voices carried across the main street, and sunlight shimmered on puddles left behind by the rain. Near the edge of town, the newly built pen held the wild black horse that had terrified everyone the day before. The townsfolk called him Storm, because no other name seemed to fit. Tommy Clark stood outside the pen, his shoes sinking into the soft mud. From where he stood, he could see Storm pacing inside, muscles shifting beneath the dark coat like rolling thunder. The air trembled each time the horse snorted. He wasn't just wild, he was broken in a way Tommy recognized, but couldn't name. A group of boys from the richer families gathered nearby, tossing pebbles into the puddles. "Hey, Clark," one of them yelled, grinning. "You still dreaming you're some kind of cowboy?" They laughed, the kind of laughter that had no real humor in it. Tommy ignored them, but when a pebble struck the fence post near his foot, he turned. "I wouldn't get close if I were you," the tallest boy said. "That thing's a killer. Sheriff says it almost crushed a man last night." Tommy didn't answer. He looked back at Storm, who had stopped pacing. The horse's ears twitched toward him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the boy and the beast, both outsiders in their own town. Behind him, his mother's voice broke the silence. "Tommy, come help me hang the laundry." Martha stood by the cabin steps, her face lined with worry. He gave a quick nod, but didn't move. "Tommy," she warned again, softer now, "don't go near that pen. The sheriff said it's dangerous." "I know," he murmured, but his eyes said otherwise. By midday, Sheriff Dalton arrived, his hat pulled low and a rifle resting on his shoulder. "Still here, huh?" he said to Tommy with a half smile. "You've got more guts than sense, kid." He looked at the horse, shaking his head. "We'll keep it penned till we figure what to do. Some folks say sell it, some say shoot it. Can't keep feeding a wild thing forever." Tommy's stomach twisted. "You can't shoot him. He didn't do anything wrong." The sheriff sighed. "Sometimes doing nothing's not enough. Sometimes fear's all people see." He walked off, leaving Tommy alone again. The words lingered in the boy's mind, heavy as stones. Fear. That's what they saw in Storm, and maybe what they saw in him, too. The son of an unemployed miner, the boy who lived in a broken house with a mother who worked too hard and smiled too little. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the wooden slats. Storm had stopped pacing. He stood still now, his breathing steady, his coat glowing faintly in the golden light. Tommy felt the pull again, that quiet urge to step closer. He reached into his pocket, but there was nothing there except lint and a bit of string. From inside the pen, Storm lifted his head, ears twitching. Tommy whispered. "You don't belong here, do you?" The horse snorted softly, almost like an answer. Then, a sudden crash. The horse kicked the trough, sending it tumbling against the wall. People shouted from down the road, rushing toward the noise. Tommy froze as Sheriff Dalton and a few men came running. "What happened?" the sheriff barked. "It went crazy again," a man shouted. Storm reared, slamming against the fence, mud flying in all directions. Tommy watched, heart hammering, as the horse's eyes went wild with terror. The crowd backed away. Someone yelled, "Shoot it before it hurts somebody!" "No!" Tommy's voice cracked. "Don't!" Dalton lifted his hand, motioning for everyone to stop. The horse was trembling, sides heaving, but it wasn't attacking. It was afraid. The sheriff muttered something under his breath and lowered his rifle. "Let it be," he said finally. "It's just scared." When the crowd dispersed, Tommy stayed, staring at the broken trough. He could see blood on the wood. Just a scratch, maybe, but enough to twist his stomach. He wanted to reach out, to tell the creature it wasn't alone. But fear held him there, on the other side of the fence. The evening wind rose, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Martha came again to fetch him. "Tommy," she said gently, "you can't fix everything that's hurt." He turned toward her, eyes shining. "Maybe not. But maybe I can. Try." She opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. There was something in his voice, not stubbornness, but conviction. She sighed. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, though even as the words left his lips, he wasn't sure he meant them. That night, when the stars returned over Silver Creek, Tommy lay awake once more, staring at the cracked ceiling. He could still see the fear in Storm's eyes, the same fear that lived quietly inside him. And as the wind brushed through the thin window pane, he whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, I'll find a way to help you." Outside, somewhere beyond the fields, Storm stamped a hoof against the dirt, restless, waiting. The sound carried faintly through the night, a steady rhythm that beat in time with the boy's heart. Morning slipped into Silver Creek with a pale, forgiving light, as if the sky itself wanted to forget the shouting from the day before. Tommy woke to the smell of coffee and wet wood, the cabin still damp from the storm that had crawled through every crack. Martha stood by the stove in her faded dress, humming a tune he didn't recognize. On the table lay a small sack from the grocer, flour, a wedge of cheese, and cradled in newspaper like treasure, one bright red apple. He stared at it. The color was almost too alive for their kitchen, a drop of summer against the rough boards and chipped enamel. Martha followed his gaze and paused, the humming dying on her lips. "It's for you," she said gently. "You could use a treat." Tommy swallowed. "Ma, can I take it with me?" She didn't ask where. Her eyes flicked to the window, toward the distant shape of the pen beyond the cottonwoods. 100 reasons to say no crossed her face and fell away, one by one, like leaves shaken from a branch. "Be careful," she managed. "If anyone asks, you didn't get it from me." He wrapped the apple in his handkerchief and slipped it into the pocket of his too-big jacket. The road to the pen was still soft, his shoes leaving small crescent moons in the mud. The town moved around him, the clank of the blacksmith, the lazy creak of a sign over the general store, voices trading stories about storm damage and insurance and fences. Words like cost and risk and trouble floated past, the common currencies of grown-ups. When he reached the pen, no one was there. The sun had risen just enough to burn away the last scraps of fog, and the world shone as if polished. Storm stood still in the hush, a carved shadow with breath. His coat, drying now, looked less like coal and more like velvet. He didn't pace. He watched. Ears forward, head high. A sentinel who trusted nothing but the wind. Tommy stopped a few feet from the fence, not wanting to startle him. "Morning," he said softly, as though greeting a neighbor on a porch, as though yesterday's fear did not still sit between them. Storm's nostrils flared. A bird trilled in the cottonwoods. Somewhere, a wagon rattled over a rut and kept going. The horse gave no warning this time, no strike of hoof or slam of shoulder. He simply turned, presenting the smallest angle of his eye, the kind of look that holds a question without asking it. Tommy pulled the handkerchief from his pocket, hands careful, as if unwrapping a secret. The apple glowed in his palm. He didn't reach in through the slats. He set it down on the damp earth just inside the fence, close enough to smell, far enough to choose. "It's sweet," he whispered. "You don't have to if you don't want to." For a long moment, nothing happened. Storm shifted his weight, a ripple of muscle traveling along his shoulder to that faint line of a scar. Tommy remained still, his own breath small and even. He could hear the small life sounds of the pen, a fly's thin complaint, the rustle of hay, the soft tick-tick of settling wood. Then the horse lowered his head. Not all the way, and not toward the boy, toward the apple, the earth, the idea. He paused over it, gathered its scent, and lifted his gaze to Tommy again, as if to say, "I know who brought this." The world narrowed to the triangle of eye, fruit, boy. The wind paused to listen. Storm took a bite. A crisp report cracked the quiet, and juice flashed in the sunlight. He chewed once, twice. The sound was ordinary and holy all at once. Tommy felt something loosen in his chest, as if the rope around his own lungs had been untied. He didn't grin or cry out. He only nodded, grateful, the way you nod after a prayer. Footsteps scuffed the path. Sheriff Dalton's shadow crossed the fence before his voice did. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, low so as not to jar the moment. "Didn't expect to see that." Tommy didn't look away from the horse. "He's not mean," he said, almost to himself. "Just doesn't know us yet." The sheriff tipped his hat back, studying the pair, a boy thin as a question and a horse heavy as a promise. "You know, son, some folks pay a lot of money to watch a heartwarming story like this play out in a theater." His mouth twitched. "We get it for free." "It isn't about the money," Tommy said simply. "It's about being kind. Kindness makes sense even when nothing else does." Dalton grunted, not disagreeing. He glanced around the empty edge of town, then lowered his voice. "You keep your distance. If that horse startles, I won't risk it. Not for you, not for him." "I know." The sheriff waited a breath longer, then left them to the quiet. Tommy crouched again, inching a little closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to be present. Storm nosed the earth where the apple had been, seeking stray sweetness. When he found none, he looked up, and for the first time the boy noticed how the horse's ears turned, not away, but toward him. Listening. Choosing. "Thank you for trusting me," Tommy whispered. "I'll learn the rest of it." He didn't reach for the horse. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket and found a bit of string, looped it around the lowest slat of the fence, and tied a small knot. A silly thing, a nothing thing, but it felt like leaving a sign. I was here, and I'll be back. By afternoon, word had drifted in that the grocer's son had seen the Clark boy feeding the devil. The laughs weren't as loud this time. A few even sounded curious. Tommy ignored the talk. He washed dishes for Mrs. Ogden behind the bakery in exchange for a second apple. "For your ma?" she asked with a wink. "For a friend," he said, and she let the wisp of mystery be. He returned at dusk, when the light turned the world honey-soft and forgiving. The second apple he didn't place on the ground. He held it, palm upright, steady as a fence post, breath quiet. Storm lifted his head and considered the offering. A moth flickered in the shadow between them. Tommy's hand trembled, not with fear, with hope. It is a different kind of shaking. Storm stepped closer. His breath warmed the boy's knuckles, and the smell of him, grass and dust and something rain clean, filled Tommy's head. One more step, and they would touch. The horse paused, stretched the moment thin as glass, then closed the distance. His lips brushed the apple, then the boy's skin, the soft velvet of a muzzle tracing a map no one else could read. He took the fruit with surprising gentleness. Something like a smile crossed the horse's face, or maybe it crossed the boy's, or the fences, or the lights. It didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet exchange. A gift given and accepted. A confidence returned with interest. Human-animal bond was a phrase Tommy didn't know, but he understood its truth. This wasn't horse rescue or a trick or a show. This was two lonely beings agreeing, wordlessly, to stop being lonely together. The evening cooled. Crickets struck up their tin instruments. Somewhere, Martha stepped onto their porch and listened for her son. Tommy knew he should go. He set his hand against the slat, fingers splayed, not reaching through. Storm lowered his head and let the bridge of his nose hover a breath away from those small fingers. They stood like that, not touching, and it felt more intimate than an embrace. "Tomorrow," Tommy said. "Same time." The horse flicked an ear, as if he'd mark it on a calendar the sky could read. As he turned to leave, Tommy glanced back and caught Storm's eye through the narrow gap between boards. The angle made the iris catch a last ribbon of light, a dark gem set in the wood. It held not fear, but attention, the kind you give a story when you want to hear how it ends. The boy's final words hung there, soft but certain, and the eye in the slats seemed to answer with its own quiet sentence. In that thin beam of dusk, chapter bled into chapter, and the world read on without moving its lips. For the next few days, the key and rhythm of Tommy's world changed. Morning meant chores, lessons half done, and the sound of his mother's voice calling after him as he disappeared toward the pen. Evening meant sitting quietly by the fence, speaking in low tones to a creature who still didn't trust him entirely, but no longer turned away. The days stretched warm and golden across Silver Creek, softening the edges of fear. By the fourth evening, Storm began to wait for him. Tommy could see it, the flick of an ear when his footsteps crunched over dry hay, the subtle lift of the horse's head when his voice floated on the wind. Sometimes Storm came close, sometimes he stood in the far corner, dark against the fading light. They didn't always need the apples anymore. The silence between them had begun to feel like language. Martha Clark watched from a distance, hands still in the laundry water, her heart caught between pride and dread. The boy who once flinched from his own shadow now walked straight toward danger with a calm she didn't understand. That night she said to him, "Tommy, animals are wild things. They don't think like we do." He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen since he was a toddler, asking why stars don't fall. "Maybe they don't have to think like us," he said. "Maybe they feel." Martha opened her mouth to reply, but the words never came. She saw the light in his face, not foolish, not childish, just sure. By the next afternoon, clouds gathered again, though no rain came. The air smelled of iron and dry grass. Tommy sat by the fence, sketching in the dirt with a stick, crude shapes of horses, mountains, clouds. Storm watched, tail swishing lazily, each stroke of the stick mirrored in the motion of his eyes. "You see?" Tommy said quietly. "That's you. You're faster than the wind." The horse blinked, lowering his head slightly, as if he might understand that the stick-drawn figure was a kind of prayer. The sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the spell. Martha's voice called his name, sharper this time. She had come farther than usual, her skirt brushing against the fence post. "Tommy," she said out of breath. "I told you." She stopped mid-sentence. Storm had moved closer, his muzzle pressed against the slats, the soft part of his nose ghosting over the wood. His eyes, black and deep, locked on hers for one heartbeat before flicking back to the boy. Martha froze, the rest of her warning forgotten. Tommy looked up. "He won't hurt you." Her hand fluttered to her chest. "That's what scares me, Tommy. Not that he'll hurt me, that he won't. And then you'll forget he ever could." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling with all the things he couldn't explain. "I don't forget, Ma. I just choose to trust first." Storm snorted softly, as if agreeing. The sound startled Martha less than it should have. She stood there another moment, watching her, San's hand resting on the fence, inches from the creature's nose. "You shouldn't be here after dark," she said finally. "Promise me you'll come home before the lamps are lit." "I promise," he said, but the promise already felt like a story he would have to break. After she left, the dusk settled like a shawl around the pen. Tommy leaned closer to the fence, his cheek almost against the wood. Through the slats, Storm's eye filled the space, an entire world of reflected sky and fading light. Tommy could see his own reflection inside that dark mirror, small and uncertain. But there. "We're getting closer, aren't we?" he whispered. A breeze moved through the grass, carrying the scent of hay and dust. Storm exhaled, long and steady, and the air that reached Tommy's face was warm. The boy closed his eyes. In that moment, he didn't feel like a kid from a poorhouse or a stranger in his own town. He felt seen. Behind him, footsteps again, lighter this time. He turned to find Sheriff Dalton standing by the fence, hat in hand. "Your mother's worried," the man said gently. Tommy nodded, but didn't step back. "He's calmer now." "I can see that." Dalton studied the horse, the stillness between them. "Sometimes quiet's more powerful than a shout, you know. Most folks forget that." Tommy grinned a little. "Maybe quiet is how animals talk." "Maybe quiet is how people listen," Dalton said. The sheriff stayed a while, leaning on the post, both of them watching the horse watch them. The world around seemed to shrink to that triangle again, man, boy, and beast, bound by something wordless and fragile. When Dalton finally left, Tommy remained, tracing circles on the wood with his fingertip, a habit he didn't notice. Later, as the first stars pricked the dark, Storm began to pace again, not out of fear, but impatience. He huffed, stamped once, then looked toward the boy. Tommy laughed softly. I know. You want out, don't you?" The horse tossed his mane, and for the briefest instant, it looked like he nodded. "Not yet," Tommy whispered. "One day." He stayed until the moon rose, its silver light sliding through the gaps in the boards, striping the horse's body in ribbons. Storm's eye caught the glow. For a heartbeat, it looked like it held a star. Tommy thought about telling someone how it felt to see the night sky trapped inside another living thing, but he knew they wouldn't understand. Some moments weren't meant for words. When he finally left, he walked backward for a few steps, unwilling to turn his back. Storm stood still, only his tail moving, a black brush painting slow arcs in the air. The boy gave a small wave, almost shy. "See you tomorrow," he said. And through the slats, that same steady eye followed him until he disappeared down the dirt road, carrying with him the quiet proof that trust, once begun, doesn't vanish with the dark. When Saturday dawned, Silver Creek woke with its usual hum, hammers tapping, wagons rolling, the faint notes of a fiddle drifting from the saloon porch. But something in the air was different, charged with curiosity. Word had spread. The Clark boy had tamed the wild black horse. People loved to doubt miracles and secretly hoped to witness one. Tommy didn't know the rumor had reached every ear. He arrived at the pen like always, his hand still smelling faintly of soap from the morning dishes. The world shimmered under a thin heat haze. Storm stood near the gate, mane glossy in the light, as if he too sensed that the day would not be like the others. Before Tommy could greet him, voices came up the road. 3 men and 2 women, then more, followed by a handful of children. Soon, half the town stood around the pen. The sheriff approached last, his expression unreadable. "Well, looks like you've got an audience today," he said. Tommy's stomach tightened. "Why?" Dalton shrugged. "People want to see for themselves. They're saying you've worked a miracle." "I didn't do anything," Tommy said. "He just trusts me." "Son, that's about as close to a miracle as it gets," the sheriff replied. Martha arrived soon after, out of breath, her hair pinned hastily. She caught Tommy's eye, half pride, half terror. "Don't do anything foolish," she whispered. "They're waiting to see you fail." He nodded, though his heart drummed hard enough to make his chest ache. The crowd pressed closer. "Go on, kid," someone shouted. "Let's see this wonder horse." Tommy stepped through the gate, the wood creaking beneath his hand. Inside, the air felt thicker, the smell of hay and sweat sharper. Storm pawed the dirt once, uneasy at the noise, then fixed his gaze on the boy. For a heartbeat, everything else faded. "Hey there," Tommy said softly. "It's just me." The murmurs quieted. You could hear the slow rhythm of the horse's breath, the scuff of boots on dry ground. Storm took a step forward, then another, until his muzzle brushed Tommy's shoulder. A wave of awe rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Sheriff Dalton raised his brows. "Well, I'll be—" Tommy lifted a hand and ran it along Storm's neck. The animal didn't flinch. He lowered his head, the way he had in the pen on quiet evenings, and pressed gently against the boy's arm. The gesture was unmistakable. Trust, not fear. The kind of trust no whip or rope could ever buy. The moment hung there, shimmering in the heat. Then a man near the fence spoke up. "You got lucky once. Let's see him follow you." Tommy hesitated. He'd never led Storm before, not more than a few steps in the pen, but something in the horse's stillness told him it was time. "Come on, boy," he said softly, stepping backward, tugging the air between them like a thread. Storm hesitated, then followed. One step, then two. The crowd broke into scattered applause. The sound startled the horse. His ears flicked back, muscles twitching. "Easy," Tommy murmured. "You're all right." The horse steadied. He followed the boy in a slow, circling walk. Around and around the pen they moved. A small boy with bare feet and a creature of shadow and lightning, tethered only by faith. When they stopped, Storm exhaled, and the sound was almost human. A sigh after years of fear. Tommy rested his hand on the horse's chest. "See," he whispered. "They know now." Sheriff Dalton turned to the crowd. "Looks like the wild thing's got himself a friend." The cheers rose this time, genuine, unguarded. Even the doubters clapped. Martha pressed her hands together, tears standing in her eyes. For a moment, the noise of the town softened into something like grace. Afterward, as people drifted away, a few patted Tommy's shoulder. "You did good, kid. That's one brave horse." The baker's wife even offered him a sweet roll, sticky with cinnamon. For once, no one called him that miner's boy. He wasn't invisible anymore. Sheriff Dalton lingered by the fence. "You know what this means, don't you?" Tommy frowned. "What?" "People will start wanting things. They'll want to ride him, test him, prove he's not dangerous. You'll have to stand up for him." Tommy nodded. "I will." The sheriff smiled, a rare, weary kind of smile. "You've got a good heart, Tommy. Don't let this town break it." As the sheriff walked away, Martha came to his side. "You scared me half to death," she said, but her voice was soft. "I didn't do anything, Ma," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You did more than you think," she replied. "Sometimes being gentle is the bravest thing a person can do." That evening, the sun fell low over the Rockies, painting the world in copper and rose. Tommy sat on the fence, feet dangling, watching Storm graze in the pen. Every so often, the horse lifted his head, eyes glinting in the light, and the boy felt the same quiet understanding pass between them. The noise of the crowd was gone now, replaced by the wind's hush through the dry grass. Yet the memory lingered. How the horse had followed, how the town had gasped, how the impossible had briefly felt real. He whispered, "You did good, Storm." The horse flicked his ear toward him, chewing lazily, and for the first time, Tommy laughed out loud, a sound pure and bright as the sky overhead. But even in that laughter, somewhere deep down, he sensed what the sheriff had meant. Miracles draw eyes, and not all eyes are kind. As the last light slipped away, Tommy leaned his head on the post, watching the horse in the growing dark. The smell of dust and hay wrapped around him, warm and familiar. "We'll be all right," he said quietly, unsure if he was promising the horse or himself. From inside the pen, Storm lifted his head, ears pricking, as if he'd heard every word. The boy smiled, too tired and too full of wonder to move. The night came on slow, filled with crickets and faraway fiddle music. And above it all, one soft truth held steady. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change an entire town. The next morning broke sharp and bright, the kind of light that makes even dust look holy. Silver Creek buzzed louder than usual. News had spread beyond town lines now. The poor miner's boy who could calm the wild black horse. By noon, wagons rattled in from nearby farms, strangers leaning over rails, craning to see what everyone was whispering about. Sheriff Dalton tried to keep order, but the murmur of expectation rippled through the air like static. Men spat tobacco and speculated about training, about value. "A fine stallion like that could fetch $100, someone said. Another laughed. "If he lives long enough for anyone to ride him?" Tommy arrived to find the pen surrounded. Martha trailed behind, clutching her shawl, her face drawn tight. "I told you, Tommy," she muttered. "Once people see something they can use, they stop seeing what it means." He didn't answer. He just kept walking until he reached the fence. Storm lifted his head at the sound of the boy's steps. The horse's coat gleamed blue-black under the noon sun, his tail flicking in the dry heat. When he spotted Tommy, his ears tilted forward, a silent greeting. From the crowd came a deep, mocking laugh. A tall man in a clean vest and fine boots pushed his way to the front. "So this is the famous pair," he said, voice thick with amusement. "Name's Riley. I own the ranch west of here." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you've got this beast under control. Mind if I take a look?" Before Tommy could speak, Sheriff Dalton stepped between them. "The boy's done good work, but the horse ain't ready." Riley scoffed. "Not ready, or not yours to show." He turned to the onlookers. "What's the harm in trying? Let's see if the miracle holds." The crowd murmured, curiosity sharpening like knives. Tommy's pulse thudded in his ears. "Please, sir," he said. "He's not mean. He just—" "Relax, kid," Riley interrupted, swinging one leg over the fence. "I've broken more horses than you've had birthdays." Dalton barked, "Riley, that's a bad idea." But it was too late. The rancher dropped inside the pen, spurs jingling. Storm froze, his eyes flashed, nostrils wide. The memory of pain, of ropes and shouting men, lived inside him like a buried ember. Tommy stepped forward, palms raised. "Don't," he whispered, voice trembling. "He doesn't know you." Riley ignored him. "Easy, boy," he said mockingly, stepping closer. He reached for the horse's mane, a single touch, and the ember exploded. With a roar that shook the boards, Storm reared up, hooves slicing the air. The crowd screamed and stumbled back. Riley shouted, stumbling as the animal's massive body twisted, a flash of black fury and terror. The fence groaned. Dalton reached for his revolver. "Don't shoot!" Tommy's voice tore from his chest. He ducked through the rail before anyone could stop him. "Please, he's just scared." The sheriff's hand hovered above his gun. Martha's scream carried over the din. "Tommy!" Inside the pen, chaos spun like a storm reborn. Storm crashed against the boards, throwing splinters into the sun. Riley scrambled out, cursing, his pride bleeding more than his hands. "That thing's crazy," he spat. "Shoot it before it kills someone." The crowd roared in agreement, fear spreading faster than sense. Dalton drew the gun halfway. "Back off, Tommy!" But Tommy stood between the barrel and the horse, his arms wide, his voice breaking. "No! He's not dangerous. He's hurt. You scared him." Storm backed into the far corner, sides heaving, eyes rolling white. The boy's voice trembled, but he didn't move. "It's all right, Storm," he said softly, barely audible under the noise. "It's me." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the horse stilled, the terrible energy draining from him, muscle by muscle, breath by breath. Dust hung in the light like smoke after battle. Dalton lowered the gun. The sound of it clicking back into its holster was the loudest thing in the world. "Everybody out," he ordered quietly. "Now." The crowd broke apart, shame-faced murmurs fading down the road. Riley muttered curses as he limped away. Only Tommy, his mother, and the sheriff remained. Martha ran to the fence, tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. "Tommy, what were you thinking?" He turned to her, face streaked with sweat, voice raw. "I couldn't let them hurt him. He's like me, Ma. Nobody wanted him." Her breath caught. The sheriff looked down, pretending not to hear. When the pen was quiet again, Tommy approached Storm slowly. The horse trembled, but didn't retreat. He laid a hand on the animal's neck, feeling the heartbeat thrumming under his palm, a rhythm wild and fragile. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise." Storm exhaled, the sound low and exhausted. He lowered his head, brushing his muzzle against the boy's shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something close. Dalton cleared his throat. "Tommy," he said, voice gentler than before, "I can't protect him forever. The town's scared. They'll vote on what to do. If it happens again—" "I know," Tommy interrupted, staring into the dark eye that reflected his small, dirt-smudged face. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't." The sheriff nodded, heavy-hearted. "You've got one last chance, son. Make it count." That night, the town slept uneasy. The story of the demon horse spread fast. Some said it had tried to kill Riley. Others claimed the boy had bewitched it. But in the Clark cabin, beneath the steady creak of wind in the eaves, Tommy whispered to the darkness, "They don't see what I see. They don't hear you the way I do." Outside, under a spill of moonlight, Storm stood still in the pen, his breath rising like smoke. Between them lay the fence, the line the world insisted should not be crossed. But the boy knew, and maybe the horse did too, that tomorrow would decide everything. Night pressed against the windows of the Clark cabin, heavy and unmoving. The storm that had once brought the Black Horse to Silver Creek had long passed. But another kind of storm was gathering inside Tommy, quieter, deeper, and harder to escape. Martha sat by the table, her sewing untouched in her lap. The only sound was the slow tick of the clock and the whisper of wind outside. Tommy sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards. His clothes still smelled faintly of hay and fear. "You could have been trampled," she said finally. Her voice wasn't sharp, just worn thin, like fabric rubbed too many times. "If Sheriff Dalton hadn't stopped them," Tommy interrupted softly. "They were going to shoot him, Ma. I couldn't let them." "He's a horse, Tommy," she said. "You can't save him from what he is." He lifted his eyes. "What he is? He's scared. So am I. Nobody ever asked what that felt like." Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked away toward the small window where moonlight pooled on the sill. "You're just a boy," she whispered. "I'm the only one who listened," he said. Silence settled again, long enough for the clock to mark every second that neither of them could take back. Finally, Martha folded her hands. "You've got to stop going there," she said quietly. "They'll decide soon, and the sheriff can't fight the whole town." Tommy's throat tightened. "So they'll kill him? For being afraid?" Martha's voice broke. "They'll do what people do when they don't understand something, Tommy." He stood, pushing the chair back so gently it didn't scrape. "Then I'll make them understand." Later, when the lamp burned low, Martha found herself watching her son's sleeping face. Softer now, his lashes resting against his cheeks. She thought about the years since his father died in the mines, how Tommy had folded inward, quiet as dust. This horse, wild and unwanted, had awakened something she thought was gone. The part of him that still believed gentleness mattered. She reached to brush the hair from his forehead, but stopped short, afraid to wake the dream he was chasing. The next morning, Silver Creek glimmered under a thin veil of mist. Tommy rose before dawn and walked to the pen, the world hushed except for his boots crunching frost. Storm stood motionless, head low, his dark coat silvered with dew. He looked exhausted, as though he, too, had carried the weight of last night's fear. "Hey," Tommy whispered, resting his arms on the fence. "I know. They don't see you the way I do." Storm flicked his ears toward the boy, eyes steady. Tommy climbed the lower rail and sat there, watching the sun climb over the Rockies. "They say you're dangerous," he murmured. "But they said that about me too once, that I didn't belong anywhere. Guess we're both the wrong kind of quiet." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of carrot he'd saved from supper. "Don't tell Ma," he said, smiling faintly. Storm stepped closer, breath clouding the air between them. The carrot disappeared from Tommy's hand with a crunch. For a while, they stayed like that, boy and horse breathing the same rhythm, the morning slowly unfolding around them. Then Sheriff Dalton appeared at the edge of the field. His face looked older in the light. "Town meeting today," he said. "They'll talk about what to do with the horse." Tommy swallowed. "I want to be there." Dalton hesitated. "They won't want you to speak." "Then I'll listen," Tommy said. "Sometimes listening's how you fight." The sheriff nodded. "You've got your father's stubborn streak." He paused, lowering his voice. "The rancher's fine, by the way. Bruised pride, that's all. But he's stirring things up. You should be ready for that." That afternoon, the town gathered in front of the general store. Men leaned on hitching posts, women stood in tight clusters, and the air buzzed with opinion. Riley's booming voice carried over the crowd. "That animal's dangerous! The boy's lucky to be alive! What if next time someone's not?" Tommy stood near the back, fists clenched in his pockets. Dalton stepped up onto the porch, hands raised for quiet. "You all saw what happened," he said. "But you also saw how the horse calmed when the boy spoke. He's not a threat. He's scared." "Scared animals kill," Riley barked. "Better a bullet than a broken neck." Martha's hand found Tommy's shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." But Tommy stepped forward anyway. His voice, when it came, was small, but steady. "He's like me," he said. The crowd turned. "He didn't ask to be here. He didn't hurt anyone on purpose. You're just scared because he's different." Riley laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You think we're scared of a horse?" Tommy nodded. "Yes, sir. The same way you're scared of people who don't fit where you think they should." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Dalton's eyes softened, pride hidden behind his mustache. Martha's heart pounded so hard she thought she might cry out. Tommy swallowed hard. "If you shoot him, you're not killing a monster. You're killing the only thing that ever trusted me." No one spoke for a long time. Then an older man near the edge of the crowd said, "Let the boy try again. If it goes wrong, We'll know. Heads turned, nodding. Riley's scowl deepened, but he didn't argue. Dalton looked at Tommy. You sure about this? Yes, the boy said. Just give me one more chance. That evening, back at the pen, the sheriff stood watch while Tommy stepped inside. The air was still and cool. Storm lifted his head, the whites of his eyes soft now, not wild. Tommy reached out and laid his palm against the horse's neck. They're giving us one last try, he whispered. Let's not waste it. Storm leaned into the touch, warm and heavy. The sheriff turned away, pretending to check his watch, but there was a flicker of relief in his eyes. As the sun dropped behind the mountains, Martha appeared at the fence. She didn't call for her son this time. She just watched, tears catching the last light, and whispered to herself, maybe faith isn't about believing something will work out. Maybe it's about loving it enough to try. The night that followed the town meeting was the first in a long time that Silver Creek slept without rumor. People had said their piece, voted for their conscience, and left the outcome to a sunrise they weren't sure they believed in. For Tommy, sleep didn't come at all. He lay awake, listening to the creak of the roof and the steady sigh of wind brushing the eaves, the same sound that had filled his world since the storm began it all. Before the horizon even paled, he slipped from bed, pulling on his boots in the half-dark. Martha stirred in the next room. Tommy? She whispered. I'm just going to check on him, he said. Be careful, she murmured, already half dreaming again. Outside, the world was still, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. Frost glazed the fields, silvering the grass tips, and turning each breath into smoke. His footsteps whispered down the dirt road until the shape of the pen appeared out of the mist. Storm was awake. His black coat shimmered faintly in the blue light, and his breath rose in slow clouds. When he saw the boy, he stepped closer to the fence, ears forward, not wary, expectant. Tommy leaned against the rail. Morning, partner, he said softly. We've got one chance to prove them wrong. The horse huffed as though he understood. Tommy smiled. Yeah, I know. I'm scared too. He unlatched the gate, just enough to step inside. The air felt sharper here, charged with the quiet electricity of trust. He reached for Storm's mane, fingers brushing the coarse strands. If we can get through today, they'll let you live. They'll let us both breathe again. Storm shifted, nostrils flaring, and for a moment Tommy thought of every time he'd been laughed at, pushed aside, told he wasn't enough. He felt that same mix of shame and stubborn hope mirrored in the animal before him. The first streaks of orange cut the sky open, lighting the Rockies like embers. Tommy placed his forehead against Storm's neck, the warmth of the horse steady beneath his skin. I won't let them hurt you, he whispered. That's my promise. Behind him, footsteps crunched on gravel. Sheriff Dalton emerged from the fog, his coat collar turned up against the cold. Didn't figure you'd wait for me, he said. Tommy didn't move. He was already awake. Dalton nodded. So were you, I bet. They stood together, the man and the boy, watching the sun climb. You sure you're ready for this? The sheriff asked. I have to be, Tommy said. They gave me a chance. I can't waste it. Dalton's gaze softened. You remind me of your father, you know. He believed things could be mended if you just cared hard enough. Tommy looked up, eyes steady. Was he right? Not always, Dalton said quietly. but he was never wrong to try. They waited in silence until the church bell rang from town, a low, heavy sound that carried through the valley. The signal. People would be coming soon. Tommy took one last breath of the cold morning air and turned to Storm. "Time to show them who you are," he said. When the first wagon appeared on the hill, sunlight had already melted the frost. Martha walked beside it, her shawl drawn tight, her face pale with fear she tried to hide. The others followed, Riley among them, arms folded, jaw tight. Dalton stepped forward and raised a hand for quiet. "Here's the deal," he said. "The boy says the horse isn't dangerous. We'll see. If he can calm him, the animal lives. If not," his eyes met Tommy's. "You understand?" Tommy nodded. The crowd gathered in a wide circle, boots sinking into the thawing ground. Storm pawed the earth, uneasy with the noise. The smell of sweat and expectation thickened the air. Tommy entered the pen slowly, careful not to meet too many eyes. "It's okay," he murmured to the horse. "Just us, like before." Storm's ears flicked toward the sound. The world seemed to shrink to their breathing. Tommy lifted a rope, not to bind, just to show. "We'll go slow," he whispered. "If you follow, they'll see." The first step felt like walking into a dream. Storm followed, the second smoother, then a third. A murmur ran through the crowd, astonishment, disbelief. Riley spat into the dirt. "Luck," he muttered. Tommy led Storm in a slow circle. "That's it," he said, his voice barely audible. "One more, for good measure." He turned, and the horse mirrored him perfectly. The movement was unplanned, instinctive, a rhythm born of quiet trust. Dalton exhaled, his hand falling from the gun at his side. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, forgetting himself. Storm halted beside Tommy, lowering his head until his muzzle brushed the boy's sleeve. The touch was soft, deliberate. The crowd's silence broke into hesitant applause. Martha covered her mouth, tears blurring her sight. But before the noise could swell, a sudden crack echoed, a board snapping underfoot, someone stumbling near the fence. The horse flinched, muscles tensing. A single moment of stillness, sharp as lightning. And then he reared slightly, eyes flashing. "Easy," Tommy said quickly, stepping closer instead of back. "Easy, Storm. It's all right." The horse trembled, sides heaving. Then, slowly, he lowered his head again, breath coming hard but steady. Tommy laid a hand on his cheek. "You're safe," he said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you." The tension drained away, leaving only the sound of wind through the grass. Dalton's voice rang out, quiet but certain. "That's enough. You've seen what you needed to see. The horse stays." Relief broke like sunlight. The crowd exhaled, laughter mingling with murmurs of amazement. Even Riley, face dark with embarrassment, found nothing to say. Martha ran forward, stopping at the fence. "You did it," she whispered, her voice shaking. Tommy turned, smiling for the first time in days. "No, Ma, we did." She frowned, confused. "He only trusted me because I never stopped believing in him," Tommy said. "You never stopped believing in me." Dalton touched his hat, his eyes bright in the morning glare. "Well, son, looks like Faith just bought that horse a sunrise." Tommy laughed softly, the sound catching in his throat. He turned back to Storm. The horse stood tall, black coat glowing in the new light, ears twitching toward the boy. For the first time, they both looked free. As the crowd dispersed, The sheriff lingered. "You kept your promise," he said. Tommy nodded. So did he. When the last wagon rolled away, the field returned to silence. Tommy rested his forehead against Storm's neck one final time that morning, whispering words only the horse could hear. "They think this was for you, but maybe it was for me too." The sun rose higher, burning away the last of the mist, and the boy's small shadow melted into the horse's. One shape, one story, bound by a promise made at dawn. The morning after the promise, Silver Creek felt strangely quiet, as though the valley itself was catching its breath. The crowd had gone home the day before, with hearts warmed and stories ready to retell. The poor boy who tamed the wild black horse with nothing but patience. But under the calm, a tremor remained. Miracles, people said, don't last. Tommy knew it too. As he walked toward the pen, he caught the faint smell of smoke from a far chimney, the cold bite of dew in the air. He'd slept little, his dreams full of hooves and thunder, though the sky had stayed clear. The memory of Storm's near panic still throbbed behind his ribs. A single noise, a sudden motion. That was all it took to wake the fear again. When he reached the fence, Storm was waiting. The horse's coat glistened black-blue in the new light. His eyes were softer now, yet somewhere behind them lingered a question. "Do you still trust me?" Tommy smiled faintly. "I do," he said. "And I need you to trust me back." He stepped inside. The ground was dry again, dust rising around his boots. "Let's try something," he whispered. He'd brought a worn halter, one he'd borrowed from Sheriff Dalton. The idea wasn't to break Storm, just to show him the world outside the pen. Storm stood still as the boy lifted the leather straps. "It's all right," Tommy said. "You're not trapped, not anymore." He held out the halter for the horse to see. Storm's ears flicked forward, his muscles rippled. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered his head. Tommy slipped the loop gently over his muzzle, his fingers shaking. When the buckle clicked, a strange stillness filled the air. A new kind of silence, one heavy with meaning. Tommy exhaled. "Good boy." From the road, a voice called out. It was Sheriff Dalton, watching from the fence. "You sure you're ready to take him out?" Tommy turned. "He's ready." Dalton nodded once. "Then take it slow. A man shouldn't rush a friendship." The gate creaked open, and for the first time, Storm stepped beyond the walls that had held him since the storm. His hooves met the open earth, his nostrils flaring as if tasting freedom itself. The sound of it, the deep, steady rhythm of hoofbeats, spread across the field, the kind that makes the heart keep time. Tommy walked beside him, one hand lightly on the rope, not guiding, just accompanying. The wind rose, brushing through the horse's mane, sending dark strands across the boy's face. He laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in wonder. "We did it," he said. But the moment's peace didn't last. From beyond the barn, a sudden crash rang out, a wooden board falling, the echo sharp as a gunshot. Storm startled, eyes wide. His body tensed like a bowstring. Before Tommy could speak, the horse bolted forward, the rope jerking from his hand. "Storm!" The world tilted. Dust rose in a violent swirl as the horse galloped across the open field, heading toward the old fence line. Tommy sprinted after him, heart pounding, shouting his name. Dalton swore, running too, boots slamming the dirt. Storm reached the fence and skidded to a halt just before the drop, a shallow ravine that opened into the creek below. His sides heaved, breath shuddering. He was cornered by nothing but his own fear. Tommy slowed, stopping a few feet away, chest burning. "It's okay," he gasped. "I'm here." Dalton raised a hand. "Tommy, don't!" But the boy shook his head. "He won't run from me." Step by step he approached. The horse trembled, hooves scraping the edge. "You're all right," Tommy said softly. "Nobody's chasing you. It's just noise, just a sound, that's all." The rope dragged behind Storm, tangled in the grass. The boy reached out, his fingers brushing the air between them. "Look at me," he whispered. The horse turned, eyes wide, not wild now, just lost. "You remember? The apple, the fence, the quiet." A long breath passed. Storm's muscles eased. He took one step back from the edge, then another. The rope brushed Tommy's boot. He caught it gently, not pulling, just holding on. "That's it," he said, voice barely audible. Behind them, the sheriff exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. Tommy smiled, tears stinging his eyes. "See? I told you he'd come back." Storm lowered his head, pressing his muzzle to the boy's chest. The weight of it almost toppled Tommy, but he didn't move away. He stood there, arms half raised, caught between laughter and sobbing. Dalton looked on, and even he couldn't hide the wetness in his eyes. The sheriff finally spoke, voice rough. "Son, you just did something no man in this town could have done. You didn't tame him. You made him believe again." Tommy shook his head. "He tamed me first." They walked back slowly, the boy leading, the horse following without hesitation. At the fence, Dalton opened the gate. The horse paused, glanced once toward the open hills, then stepped inside willingly. As they secured the gate, the sheriff said, "You know, that horse could run. He could jump that fence and never look back." Tommy smiled faintly. "I think he knows freedom's not always about leaving." Dalton nodded, the morning light glinting off his badge. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's about choosing to stay." When they reached the cabin, Martha was already outside, apron still in her hands. Her eyes widened when she saw them, the boy and the horse walking side by side, calm and unbroken. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Tommy stopped in front of her. "We had a scare," he said quietly. "But he came back." She looked at the animal, then at her son. "So did you." Storm snorted softly, the sound low and gentle, like a sigh. Tommy laughed, brushing his hand along the horse's neck. "I think he's saying sorry," Martha smiled through tears. "Then you'd better forgive him." The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the valley. The air felt lighter, freer. Storm lifted his head toward the mountains, the same direction from which he'd once come, not yearning now, but remembering. Tommy followed his gaze. "One day," he said softly, "when you're ready." The horse flicked his tail, ears twitching in agreement. It was enough. For the first time since the storm that had brought them together, everything felt still, balanced, as though the world had finally exhaled. The town might still whisper, the rancher might still sneer, but here, in the morning light, a boy and a black horse had found their peace. By the time the next Sunday came, Silver Creek had settled back into its rhythm, wagons rattling, the smell of bread from the bakery, gossip rolling through the dusty streets like tumbleweed. But underneath the calm, something had shifted. People no longer spoke of that wild black horse with fear. They spoke of him with wonder. A few even called him a miracle. Sheriff Dalton, however, wasn't convinced miracles came without cost. He watched Tommy and Storm from afar, often leaning against the post by the general store, hat tilted low. The boy had begun leading the horse around the pen each morning, his steps sure and light, his words barely more than a breath. And every time, the sheriff thought, the world's holding its breath too. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the valley, Dalton approached. "Tommy," he said, resting a hand on the fence, "the mayor wants to see what you've done. They're planning a gathering out by the square tomorrow. The town wants proof before they let the horse stay for good." Tommy frowned. "Proof? People forget quick," Dalton said. "They need to see again what you already know." That night, Tommy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The horse had already proved everything: trust, patience, forgiveness. But to others, proof meant performance. He thought about the crowds, the noise, the smell of sweat and dust and expectation, and he feared it might undo everything they had built from silence. Before dawn, he walked to the pen. Storm was resting, the faint shimmer of his coat reflecting the thin moonlight. The boy leaned close and whispered, "Tomorrow's the last time. After that, you're free, one way or another." The horse stirred, as if he'd understood. When the sun rose, it brought with it a carnival air. The townsfolk gathered near the open field behind the church. Men brought benches, women carried baskets, children perched on fences, eyes wide. Martha stood apart, hands clasped tightly. Dalton waited by the gate, jaw tense. Riley was there too, arms folded, a half-smile curdled on his face. Tommy arrived leading Storm, his hand resting lightly on the rope. The black horse moved like a shadow made of sunlight, calm, powerful, every muscle humming with quiet energy. The crowd hushed. Dalton raised his voice. "Folks, you've seen this horse fight. You've seen him fear, and you've seen what one boy's kindness can do. If there's any doubt left in you, now's the time to look close." Tommy nodded once. He stepped into the open ground, unclipping the rope. Storm stood free, unbound. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. "It's all right," Tommy said softly, his tone barely above the breeze. "We've done this before. Just you and me." He took a few steps backward. The horse followed, slow, steady. Tommy turned in a circle, and Storm mirrored him. The rhythm between them was as natural as breathing. It wasn't spectacle. It was understanding made visible. The crowd murmured, spellbound. Even Riley's smirk faltered. Then, as if guided by something unseen, Tommy stopped and lowered to one knee. His voice carried, clear and calm. "You don't owe me anything. But if you trust me, just once more, show them what you've already shown me." For a moment, nothing happened. The wind caught the edge of Tommy's shirt. Dust drifted lazily through the sunlight. Storm stood motionless, head high, tail flicking gently. Then he exhaled, a long, low sound, and lowered himself, one leg, then the other, until his knees touched the earth. The gasp that followed was unlike any sound Silver Creek had ever made. Some clapped hands to their mouths, others simply froze. Martha pressed a trembling hand to her heart. Dalton removed his hat, eyes glistening. Riley took a step back, his disbelief raw and unguarded. Tommy stayed still, barely breathing. The horse's head lowered beside him until boy and beast were at the same height, equal in the dirt. In that quiet, time seemed to fold. There was no pen, no fear, no storm, just two lives bound by trust, the world watching but unable to understand the language they spoke. When Tommy finally rose, Storm followed. The applause came slow at first, then spread like fire. Dalton's voice broke through the roar. "Well, folks," he said, his throat rough. "Looks like we've just witnessed something better than a miracle. We've seen mercy." The crowd cheered louder, hats thrown in the air, laughter and tears mixing in the sunlight. Riley turned away, muttering, but even he couldn't quite hide the softness creeping into his eyes. Tommy walked to the edge of the field, and Martha met him halfway. She cupped his face, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost you to that horse, but maybe you found yourself instead." He smiled through his tears. "He found me first." Storm shook his mane, the light catching in it like fire. Tommy turned toward the crowd, their faces glowing with awe and disbelief. "You don't have to be strong to do something good," he said, his voice steady. "You just have to care enough not to stop trying." Dalton put a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more for this town than you'll ever know, son." As the crowd began to drift away, laughter echoing down the road, Tommy stayed behind with Storm. The sun was sinking, throwing long golden shadows across the field. The horse stood still beside him, head tilted as though listening. "You did it," Tommy whispered. "You showed them who you are." Storm nudged his shoulder gently, and the boy laughed, tears bright on his cheeks. Above them, the sky deepened into violet, the first stars waking. Tomorrow, everything might change. People forget, the world moves on, but this moment would stay. A boy, a horse, and the quiet truth that kindness, once given, kneels for no one. The day after the kneeling, Silver Creek woke different. The town that once whispered with fear now carried a hush of reverence, as though something sacred had passed through and left its shadow behind. No one called Storm the devil's horse anymore. Children pointed when they saw him from a distance, their voices full of awe. Men at the saloon nodded when Tommy walked by. Even Riley kept his silence, which, in its own way, was louder than any apology. For the first time since his father's death, Tommy felt like the world wasn't just something happening to him. It was something he was shaping, one quiet act at a time. Yet that newfound peace came with an ache he didn't expect. The knowledge that Storm wasn't meant to stay behind fences forever. He visited early that morning, the dew still clinging to the grass. The pen looked smaller now that Storm had earned the town's trust. The horse lifted his head when the boy arrived, his breath fogging in the cool air. Tommy smiled. "Hey, you slept all right?" Storm stepped closer, brushing his nose against the fence, a gesture so gentle it made Tommy's throat tighten. He remembered what Dalton had said yesterday as the crowd dispersed. You can't cage gratitude. Sooner or later, it needs to run. Tommy whispered, "I think he's right." Footsteps approached behind him. Sheriff Dalton, hat in hand, stopped a few feet away. "You know, son," he said, "the council decided last night. The horse is yours to keep, if you want him." Tommy turned, startled. "Mine?" Dalton nodded. "You saved him. You earned him. But it's up to you whether keeping him is what's best." The boy looked back at Storm. The horse pawed at the ground, restless but calm. His body seemed carved from sunlight and shadow, too alive to be confined, too loyal to just disappear. Tommy took a long breath. "He's never been anyone's, Sheriff." "Not really." Dalton studied him quietly. "That's a hard kind of love to learn at your age." By mid-morning, word had spread. A few townsfolk gathered at the edge of the field, sensing something was about to happen. Martha came too, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes soft with pride and worry. Tommy stood by the gate, the latch already undone. Storm paced on the other side, ears flicking toward the open world beyond. The mountains glowed pale blue in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow. The wind carried the smell of pine and freedom. "You see that?" Tommy said, nodding toward the horizon. "That's where you belong, not here with fences and crowds." Martha took a step closer. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "No one would think less of you." Tommy shook his head. "It's not about what they think. It's about what he needs." He turned to the horse again. "You taught me something, Storm. That being afraid doesn't mean you stop moving forward. It just means you trust someone enough to walk beside you anyway." His hand trembled as he reached for the gate. "You're free now." The hinges groaned as it swung open. Storm hesitated at first, lifting his head to scent the air. The world outside shimmered with light. For a moment, he looked back at Tommy. Just once. And the boy thought he saw a thank you in those dark eyes. Then Storm bolted forward. His hooves tore through the grass, kicking up dust like sparks. He ran toward the horizon, faster than Tommy had ever seen him move, mane flying, body stretching long and lean. The sound of his gallop filled the valley, wild and beautiful and unbearably final. The crowd watched in silence. Martha placed a hand on her son's shoulder, her voice a whisper. "You let him go." Tommy nodded. "That's how I know he was mine." For a long time, they stood together, watching the black figure grow smaller against the rising hills until it vanished completely into the line of sky. Dalton cleared his throat. "You did the right thing." Tommy wiped his face, pretending it was the wind. "I know, but knowing doesn't make it easier." The sheriff smiled faintly. "It never does. That's what makes it real." Days passed. The town returned to its routine, though it felt gentler somehow, quieter. Tommy helped his mother fix the roof, ran errands for the general store, fed the chickens. But sometimes, when the wind shifted, he'd pause mid-task, tilting his head. Somewhere beyond the hills, he could almost hear hoofbeats echoing across the open land. Then, one evening near dusk, as the sun poured gold over the valley, he saw a dark shape cresting the ridge. His heart stumbled. He dropped the bucket he was carrying and ran toward the fence. Storm was there, standing on the rise, watching him. The horse's coat gleamed like burnished metal, mane wild, eyes steady. He hadn't come back broken or lost. He had come back because he wanted to. Tommy stood still, breath caught. "You remembered," he whispered. Storm whinnied softly and began walking down the slope, slow and sure. When he reached the fence, he didn't stop. He stepped right through the open gate, as though he had never truly left. Tommy reached out a trembling hand and touched the horse's muzzle. "You came home." The horse's breath was warm against his palm, and in that quiet moment, Tommy understood something simple and vast, that freedom and love were never opposites. One only mattered when the other was given. Behind them, the sheriff and Martha stood at a distance, saying nothing. The boy and the horse stood together under the bleeding sky, shadows long and joined, neither bound nor apart, just home. Morning came slow to Silver Creek, the kind of morning that felt like a long-held breath being released. A light fog clung to the fields, softening everything. The fences, the mountains, even the sound of the waking town. Tommy stepped outside the cabin and stood barefoot on the damp grass, his breath rising in white clouds. He'd barely slept, afraid that when he opened his eyes, Storm would be gone again. But when he looked toward the pen, he saw that black silhouette standing tall against the pale horizon. The horse had stayed, free, but choosing to be near. Martha joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "He's still here," she said softly. Tommy nodded, smiling faintly. Maybe he figured out this place isn't so bad. She looked at her son. Taller now, stronger, though the same quiet light shone in his eyes. Or maybe he stayed because you are. The boy didn't answer. He walked across the grass, dew soaking his cuffs, until he reached the fence. Storm turned at the sound, ears flicking forward. Tommy placed a hand on the post. "Hey, partner," he said, voice barely above the wind. The horse stepped closer. His coat shimmered in the half-light, deep and dark as oil. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Tommy whispered, "You know, I think we're both different now. You learned how to trust, and I learned when to let go." Storm snorted softly, as if to disagree. Tommy chuckled. "Yeah, maybe we both learned the same thing, that letting go doesn't mean walking away." Behind him, the town began to stir. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly, followed by a dog's bark and the clatter of wagon wheels. But here, inside this quiet corner of the valley, the world felt still. Sheriff Dalton appeared at the edge of the field, his hat tilted low, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Morning," he called out. "Thought I'd find you here." Tommy turned. "You always do?" Dalton smiled. "Habit, I guess. Just making sure my two favorite troublemakers are still behaving." He leaned on the fence beside Tommy, sipping his coffee. "You know, the town's been talking about you. Some want to build a proper stable, something safer for him. Others think you ought to ride him in the summer parade. Wouldn't that be a sight?" Tommy laughed. "I don't think Storm's much for parades." Dalton shrugged. "Maybe not, but I reckon he likes an audience, as long as it's the right one." They stood together watching the horse graze, the sun slowly bleeding gold across the prairie. "You ever think about leaving?" Dalton asked suddenly. Tommy hesitated. "Sometimes. But not yet. There's still something here I'm supposed to do." The sheriff nodded. "Maybe that's how you know you're home. When staying feels like a choice, not a cage." He set his empty cup on the fence post and started back toward town. "You take care of him, son," Tommy called after him. "I will." When the sheriff's figure disappeared down the dirt road, Tommy turned back to Storm. "You hear that?" he said. "We're officially respectable now." The horse flicked his tail, unimpressed. As the sun climbed higher, Tommy opened the gate and stepped inside. Storm lifted his head, watching him approach. The boy reached up and rested his hand on the horse's neck. The warmth beneath his palm was alive, steady, familiar. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's see what the world looks like from up there." It took a moment. A silent exchange, a breath, a decision. But then Storm lowered himself slightly, just enough for the boy to climb onto his bare back. Tommy settled there, feeling the heartbeat beneath him, the strength, the grace. For the first time, he didn't feel like a boy trying to prove something. He felt like part of something larger, the land, the light, the living. He gave a small click of his tongue. Easy now. Storm stepped forward, slow at first, then faster, his hooves drumming the earth like a heartbeat. They moved together across the open field, the wind catching Tommy's hair, the sun warming his face. The horizon opened wide before them, endless, forgiving. From the porch, Martha watched, her eyes glistening. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered a line that would stay with her forever. He found what I never dared to believe in. Out on the prairie, Tommy leaned forward, his laughter carried by the wind. "Go, Storm!" he shouted. The horse answered with a burst of speed, muscles rippling, mane streaming behind like a banner. They raced toward the line where earth met sky, two silhouettes cutting through gold and dust. The sun crowned the mountains, washing the world in light so soft it felt like grace. When they slowed, Tommy slid off and stood beside the horse, both breathing hard, both alive in the quiet that followed. He looked up at the sky, wide, blue, endless. "You did it," he said, voice shaking. "You're free, and so am I." Storm lowered his head, bumping Tommy's shoulder, a touch that said everything words couldn't. The boy smiled through the tears he didn't bother to hide. "Yeah," he whispered, "we made it." The camera of the heart might have pulled back then, a wide shot of the boy and the black horse standing on the golden prairie, the mountains glowing behind them, the morning wind wrapping around them like a blessing. And for anyone watching, for anyone who had ever been afraid, or lost, or unwanted, that image carried its own quiet message, that even broken things can find their way home if someone believes long enough. The world kept turning. The town would change, the seasons too. But somewhere in Colorado, at the edge of a small town called Silver Creek, a boy and a horse still waited for the next sunrise. Two souls bound not by ownership, but by faith, by kindness, by love. And now, I want to hear from you. If you were that boy, would you have dared to reach out to the wild black horse? Comment 1 if you believe kindness can tame even the fiercest hearts, or 0 if you're not so sure. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of hope, courage, and the bond between humans and animals. The next story might just touch your soul again.